Have you ever wondered what happens when you stare too long into the night sky? When curiosity becomes an invitation and something out there finally answers. Tonight, in the silence of a rain-soaked observatory, an astronomer discovers that the stars are not as distant as they seem. What he finds beyond the lens will leave you questioning what truly watches us from the dark. Stay with me until the end of the story. And if you enjoy mysteries wrapped in suspense, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon. Because what you are about to hear, you will not forget. The rain was steady that night. It tapped against the tall windows of the observatory, soft at first, like fingers brushing glass. Inside, the astronomer sat alone. The air smelled of wet stone, damp paper, and the faint metallic tang of old brass instruments. He leaned over the massive telescope, its lens directed at the endless sky. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a single lantern. Rain drummed harder now, echoing through the dome above him. He adjusted the telescope slowly, carefully, until the stars sharpened into view. At first, it was the same familiar patterns. Constellations he had traced since his youth. Lines of fire in the blackness. But then, something shifted. Something glimmered where no star had ever been. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat hidden in the dark. The astronomer blinked and leaned closer. The rain outside grew heavier, rattling like countless tiny stones. His pulse matched the rhythm of the strange light. He felt a tightness in his chest, a strange discomfort he could not explain. The light grew brighter, almost trembling. And then, it moved. Not like a falling star, not like a planet's slow drift. It moved as if it was aware. The astronomer's hand froze on the brass dial. A shiver ran down his spine. The lantern beside him flickered. The rain seemed louder than before, as if pressing against the glass to come inside. The strange star pulsed again. Once. Twice. And then, it blinked out. Vanished. The telescope stared into nothing but empty blackness. But the astronomer could still feel it. A presence. Watching him. From the other side of the lens, the astronomer stepped back from the telescope. His breath came uneven, fogging the cool air around him. The silence in the observatory felt unnatural, as though even the rain had stopped to listen. But no, the rain still fell. Only now it sounded different. He tilted his head, listening. It was not the soft patter of drops anymore. It was heavier, slower, almost like footsteps. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to look back at the telescope. The lens glimmered faintly, though he had seen the star vanish. The glass surface seemed darker than before, as if something pressed against it from the other side. He leaned closer, without meaning to. The faintest vibration ran through the telescope's frame. Not from him. Not from the storm. It was something else. He reached out a trembling hand. The brass tube was cold. Colder than it should have been. Then, he saw it. A flicker. The star was back. But now it was larger. Closer. Too close. As if it had traveled across impossible distance to meet him. The astronomer's throat tightened. The light inside the telescope pulsed once more. And for the briefest second, he thought he saw an eye. Do you want me to push this moment further into the shocking climax now, or keep stretching the suspense slowly with more sensory detail? You said, more. ChatGPT said. His heart hammered against his ribs. He did not dare blink. The eye, or what seemed like an eye, vanished as quickly as it appeared. But the afterimage burned in his mind, a pale circle with a dark center. The rain crashed harder against the dome. Each drop sounded like it was striking closer, heavier, almost metallic. He tried to steady his hands, gripping the edge of the desk. The wood felt damp beneath his palms. He looked down. Moisture had spread across the surface of the table. But the ceiling above was solid. No leaks. And yet, water pooled slowly around his fingers, cold and glistening. He staggered back. The lantern sputtered, its flame thinning to a weak thread of light. The shadows inside the observatory thickened, stretching along the walls. He turned toward the telescope again. The lens no longer showed the night sky. It glowed faintly, like a round window lit from within. A faint sound slipped through it. Not rain. Not wind. A whisper.
Distant.
Unfamiliar. But it was speaking.
And it was speaking to him.
The astronomer froze. The whisper slid into his ears like a thread of ice. At first, it was broken, scattered, like wind caught in stone corridors. But then, the sounds began to form patterns. Almost words. Almost language. He leaned forward despite the dread tightening in his stomach. His body felt both heavy and weightless, as though the rain itself pressed him down. The glow inside the telescope pulsed with each syllable. The whisper grew clearer. It did not belong to any tongue he had studied, yet it pulled at his mind, shaping meaning where none should exist. He understood fragments. Not fully, but enough. Look closer. The astronomer staggered back, shaking his head. His breath came fast, shallow. The sound of the rain deepened. It no longer fell on the roof. It now drummed inside the walls, as if the storm had seeped into the bones of the observatory itself. The whisper returned, harsher this time. Look closer. The lens shimmered. It stretched, warped, as though it was no longer glass but liquid. Something moved beneath its surface.
Slow.
Deliberate. Waiting. And the astronomer realized. It was not the sky he was staring into anymore. It was something staring back. His trembling hand rose before he could stop it. Fingers hovered just above the warped surface of the lens. The glass, or whatever it had become, shifted, rippling outward like disturbed water. The whisper turned into a low hum. It resonated in his chest, deep enough to shake his bones. The lantern finally gave out. Darkness swallowed the observatory, leaving only the glow from the telescope. It painted his face in pale light, sharp against the shadows. The astronomer leaned closer. His reflection stared back at him.
Distorted.
Bent. Its eyes shimmered unnaturally, catching the glow like mirrors. For a moment he thought he saw himself smile. But he had not moved his lips. The reflection's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide. From it came the same whisper, clearer now. Closer. The astronomer's breath shook. He wanted to run. He wanted to close his eyes. But his body no longer obeyed. Step by step he leaned forward, until his face was inches from the trembling surface of the lens. The air turned cold, sharp as frost. And then, something reached out. Not from behind him, not from the shadows, but from inside the telescope. A pale hand pressed against the glass, and the glass did not hold. It rippled outward, as if it had been waiting to let something through. The astronomer staggered back, but not fast enough. The pale hand slid through the lens as if the glass were nothing but mist. Drops of water rolled from its skin, hitting the wooden floor with soft, deliberate taps. Each drop echoed louder than the rain outside. The hand was long, too long. Its fingers bent at strange angles, glistening with a faint light that did not belong to this world. Another hand followed, and then the outline of a face pressed against the trembling surface of a lens. The astronomer's throat locked. He could not breathe. He could not scream. The face emerged slowly, stretching through the glowing circle like a shadow birthing itself from water. Eyes formed first, empty, reflective, cold as polished stone. They locked onto him immediately. Not a glance, not a passing look,
but direct.
Unbroken. The astronomer felt the weight of those eyes press into his mind, as though they were peeling away his thoughts one by one. The whisper returned, but now it came from inside the observatory, from the figure half-born through the telescope. You called. The rain hammered so hard on the dome it sounded like fists pounding on metal. The astronomer's legs gave way, and he collapsed to the floor. The pale figure continued to pull itself free, inch by inch, dragging the storm with it. The figure's shoulders forced their way through the glowing circle. The lens stretched wider, as if reality itself was tearing to let it pass. The sound was unbearable, like glass splintering and water rushing at once. The astronomer crawled backward across the soaked floor, his palms slipping in the strange dampness that had spread everywhere. His lantern lay dead beside him, but the telescope's light now filled the room like a cold moon. The figure bent unnaturally, as it stepped forward. Its limbs were too thin, its joints too sharp. And yet, it moved with precision, each motion deliberate, as if it had studied human movement and was trying to copy it. Water dripped steadily from its body, but the drops never faded into the wood. Instead, they sank and vanished, leaving dark spots that seemed to pulse faintly. The astronomer's chest heaved. His voice finally broke free, rough and small. "Who are you?" The figure paused. It tilted its head, the way a curious child might. The reflective eyes blinked once, but the sound was wrong, like two stones grinding together. Its mouth stretched into a shape that resembled a smile. When it spoke, the voice was his own. "Who are you?" The astronomer froze. Every hair on his body stood on end. The figure took another step. Closer. The room seemed smaller now, the storm pressing in from all sides. The telescope still glowed behind it, a gaping hole into the blackness beyond. And, the astronomer realized, the figure was not simply here. It was an answer to a question he had never meant to ask. The figure stood still for a long moment. The only sound was the storm pounding against the dome, louder, faster, as though time itself was racing. The astronomer could feel every drop in his chest, beating like a second heart. The figure leaned forward, its empty eyes fixed on him. When it spoke again, it used his voice once more. But this time, it was not an echo. It was perfect. The same tone, the same rhythm, the same hesitation in breath. "Look closer," it said, his own lips moving silently a heartbeat after. The astronomer shook his head violently.
"No."
The figure's smile widened, though it never reached its stone-like eyes. Its hand rose, pale and dripping, pointing back to the telescope's glowing circle. The glass surface rippled again, showing not the stars, but his observatory, the very room he stood in. Only empty. No lantern. No storm. No him. The sight made his stomach twist. His body wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him, rooted to the floor as though the water had hardened into chains around his ankles. The figure spoke again, his own voice carrying a weight that felt older than the sky itself. "You asked to see. Now you must be seen." The astronomer's heart lurched violently in his chest. The telescope's glow flared brighter, flooding the room with white. And for the first time he realized the rain outside had stopped. The silence was absolute. And the only sound that remained was the beating of his own heart, pounding louder and louder, as if it was no longer his alone. The astronomer's breath tore from his throat in ragged gasps. He forced himself to crawl backward, palms slipping against the wet floorboards. But no matter how far he moved, the figure seemed closer. Its long limbs bent and straightened with an unnatural grace, each step echoing like thunder. The glow from the telescope pulsed with every movement, a rhythm that matched the racing of his heart. He dared a glance at the lens again. It no longer showed an empty observatory. Now it showed him.
His own body.
But standing still, standing calm. The reflection's eyes were dark, hollow pits. Its mouth twitched before curling into that same stretched smile. The astronomer froze. A cold realization gripped him. The telescope was not a window. It was a doorway. And the thing in the room with him was not trying to enter. It was trying to replace. The figure tilted its head again, slow, deliberate. Its dripping hand reached toward him, each finger trembling with strange hunger. The storm outside had vanished completely now. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint crack of wood beneath his weight as he tried to retreat further. The figure whispered, this time in no voice at all. Not sound, but directly inside his mind. One must remain. The telescope flared, blinding, a hole of pure white tearing whiter. And the astronomer realized, if he looked again, even for a moment, he would never look. The astronomer squeezed his eyes shut. But even in the darkness behind his eyelids, the glow burned. It pressed against his mind, carving its way into thought, into memory, into the fragile walls of self. He clutched the floor, nails biting into the damp wood, desperate to anchor himself. The figure crouched low in front of him, its face level with his. Water dripped from its chin onto his cheek, icy and sharp. He dared not open his eyes. Yet he felt its gaze. A weight, a pressure, like an ocean above him, waiting to crush. His ears filled with a rushing sound. Not rain, not storm, but a tidal roar, endless and hungry. The whisper came again, louder now, splitting inside his skull. One must remain. The floor vibrated beneath him. The telescope's hum rose to a shriek, glass and metal groaning as though the very air was tearing apart. Against his will, his eyes snapped open. And he saw it. Not the observatory, not the figure, but an expanse. An endless black sea of stars, shifting and alive. Each one an eye watching, waiting. The figure's hand gripped his shoulder, colder than ice. The touch seared through his flesh like fire. And then, he was no longer on the floor. He was standing upright.
Calm.
Still. Facing the telescope. Only, it was not him. His own body stood there, steady, unafraid. While he was somewhere else.
Falling.
Dragged downward through a storm of light and water, swallowed by the endless dark, the fall did not end. It stretched on, silent and endless, as though gravity itself had become a lie. Stars streaked past him, not burning, but watching, each one an unblinking eye that turned to follow his descent. His chest ached for breath, but no air filled his lungs. Still he lived. Still he fell. A vast shape stirred in the distance, larger than any constellation, darker than the void around it. It shifted slowly, as if it had been sleeping for eons, and now sensed his presence. The astronomer tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The void itself swallowed his voice before it could be born. The shape drew closer. Or perhaps he was being drawn toward it. Its outline refused to hold, bending and breaking like smoke. But he saw the truth in flashes. A mouth stretching wider than galaxies. A hand made of shadows curling like storms. And eyes. Not two. Not 1,000. But an infinity, each one gazing into him, through him, as though he were nothing but glass. His mind began to splinter. Thoughts scattered. Memories bled away. His name slipped first. Then the night he was born. Then the very idea of who he had been. The being's whisper came without sound, heavier than gravity, colder than time.
You saw.
You're seen. You remain. And with those words, the astronomer understood. He had not fallen into the stars. He had fallen behind them, into the place their light could never reach, a place that had always been watching. In the observatory, silence reigned. The rain had not returned. The storm was gone, as though it had never existed. Only the faint hum of the telescope lingered, low and steady, like a breath that did not belong to the room. The astronomer's body stood upright, motionless, beside the great brass tube. His eyes stared forward, calm, unblinking. But they were no longer his. They were mirrors, catching the pale glow of the lens, reflecting nothing back. Water dripped from his sleeves, pooling neatly at his boots, though the roof above remained whole and dry. His chest rose and fell in perfect rhythm, but there was no life in the motion. Only imitation. The figure, the pale intruder, was gone. Or rather, it was no longer needed. The body had been claimed. The lantern on the desk flickered back to life, though no hand touched it. The telescope adjusted itself with a slow, grinding turn. Its lens no longer searched the heavens. It pointed downward now, into the earth, into the dark. The reflection in the glass was not the sky, not stars, not worlds. It was faces, countless, layered upon one another, eyes wide, mouths open in silent cries, each one staring upward as though begging to be seen. And in their midst, just for an instant, a familiar one, the astronomer's true face. His mouth opened in a soundless scream before vanishing into the sea of countless others. The body in the observatory tilted its head, listening, as if to voices only it could hear. Then, slowly, it smiled. The body that had once been the astronomer moved with eerie calm. It crossed the observatory floor in slow, deliberate steps, boots leaving wet marks that shimmered faintly before fading into nothing. The telescope remained humming, its lens glowing brighter, the faces within pressing closer to the surface, as though straining to break through. The false astronomer reached the desk. His hand, steady and pale, rested on an open journal, its pages soaked from the water that should not have been there. The ink bled into shapes. Not words, not symbols, but stars. Small constellations, spreading across the parchment like veins. The hand moved a pen across the page, writing in the astronomer's own familiar strokes. But the lines formed no language of this world. The letters bent backward, curling into spirals that seemed to pulse like living things. The lantern flickered violently. Shadows thickened, stretching along the walls until they looked less like shapes and more like doorways. And from them, faint whispers bled through. Many voices. Layered, broken, unending. They were calling. Calling not for answers, but for release. The body of the astronomer paused. Its mirrored eyes lifted to the dome above, though the night sky could no longer be seen. Only blackness. Unmoving. Heavy. It spoke then, in his voice, low and steady. The door is open, and the humming of the telescope deepened, louder, stronger, like the heartbeat of something vast beneath the floor. The hum shook the observatory now, rattling the brass instruments, quivering the wooden beams, loosening dust from the dome above. The false astronomer did not flinch. He stood at the center of it all, pen still in hand, journal filling itself with spirals of ink that glowed faintly in the lantern's weak light. The telescope's lens widened. What had once been a circle no larger than a man's chest stretched across half the room, spilling its glow onto the soaked floor. The faces inside it pressed harder against the surface. Their mouths moved in silent unity, forming words the ear could not hear, but the bones could feel. The whispers from the shadows grew louder, answering those mouths. And then, the glass gave way. It did not shatter. It dissolved. A curtain of liquid light poured into the observatory, spilling across the floor in slow, deliberate waves. From it, hands emerged. Not pale like the first figure, but black as the void itself, long-fingered, dripping with fragments of starlight. One hand gripped the floorboards, pulling. Another clawed at the walls. Another pressed against the ceiling of the dome, leaving a smear of shadow that spread like rot. The body of the astronomer watched with a stillness that was almost reverent. Its lips moved, whispering words not meant for human throats. The voices answered back, overlapping, endless. And the first of the faces pushed through. It was not whole. It was not alive. It was a mask, stretched and hollow, eyes wide with a grief too ancient to bear. It fell to the floor like wet cloth, and yet it breathed. The false astronomer knelt before it, and smiled. The mask on the floor twitched. Its hollow eyes rolled toward the astronomer's body, though no muscles held them in place. A sound leaked from its mouth. Not a cry, not a scream, but a long, trembling breath, as though it had been suffocating for centuries. The false astronomer bent closer, his mirrored eyes gleaming with the light of the widening rift. Another mask followed, slipping wetly through the liquid circle. And another. And another. The observatory floor became littered with faces, all gasping, all whispering in broken fragments. They overlapped one another until the room itself seemed to breathe with their rhythm. The shadows on the walls swelled larger. The wooden beams groaned. The storm that had vanished returned at once, slamming into the dome with violent force, as if the world itself wanted to bury the sound of what was happening inside. Through the cacophony, the telescope continued its hum, steady, relentless. The false astronomer lifted one of the masks in both hands. Its hollow eyes stared back into his. Its mouth opened wider, wider still, until it tore down the center. From within, a voice emerged. His voice. "Help me." The false astronomer tilted his head, calm, expressionless. Then he pressed the mask against his own face. It sank into his skin like water into cloth, vanishing without a trace. For a moment his body shuddered. Then he straightened again, smiling wider, as though he had been completed. The masks on the floor writhed faster, their whispers rising into a desperate chorus. And above them all, the widening rift pulsed. Like the opening of an endless eye, the observatory trembled, as though the earth itself wanted to swallow it whole. The vast shape pressed further through the rift, shadow dripping, whispers echoing like waves of forgotten voices. The false astronomer bowed low, his mirrored eyes reflecting only the creature's endless gaze. The masks writhed, mouths stretched wide, feeding their silence into the air until the room felt void of breath itself. And then, the hum ceased. The light of the rift dimmed. The storm outside returned, but softer now, as if the world exhaled after holding itself too long. The vast form withdrew, receding back into the blackness, leaving only ripples where the glass lens once stood. The masks on the floor stilled, their mouths closing, their eyes dimming until they were nothing more than damp fragments of cloth and paper. The false astronomer rose to his feet. His movements were slow, measured.
Come.
He walked to the journal upon the desk and closed it gently, as though sealing something within. The lantern steadied, its flame returning to a soft, golden glow. The observatory looked unchanged.
Silent. Still.
Yet nothing was the same. The man who stood there was no longer the one who had first looked through the telescope. He turned once toward the empty lens, a faint smile upon his face. And in the silence, a whisper lingered. Not from the rift, not from the masks, but from him. One must remain. The lantern flickered once, then held steady. The rain carried on, gentle and unbroken, as if the night itself wanted to forget. The rift quivered like a living thing. Its edges rippled outward, stretching wider than the dome itself, yet never breaking the walls. It was no longer a telescope. It was an opening, a wound, and it was widening. The masks writhed on the soaked floor, their mouths gaping in unison, drawing in air as though preparing for a scream. But no scream came, only silence. A silence so heavy that the storm outside faltered, the pounding rain pausing mid-drop, frozen against the glass of the dome. The false astronomer raised his hands. The skin shimmered with faint, star-like veins, pulsing with each heartbeat that no longer belonged to him. He spoke in his own voice, but deeper now, layered with countless others. Step through. And the rift obeyed. A shape began to crawl forward, vast and deliberate, too large for the room, yet bending space itself to fit. The first thing to emerge was an arm. It was not bone. It was not flesh. It was shadow, but heavy, dripping with shards of broken starlight that hissed as they touched the wooden floor. Then came the curve of something like a shoulder, bent at an impossible angle, twisting yet steady. The masks on the ground arched upward, mouths opening wider, their silence straining as if every breath they had taken was feeding the thing that now entered. The false astronomer dropped to his knees, bowing deeply, his mirrored eyes reflecting the vast form. And as the head of the creature pushed through the glowing rift, the observatory shuddered on its foundations. The dome above cracked. Dust rained down. The stars outside were gone. Only the endless black I stared back, watching, claiming. The observatory trembled as though the earth itself wanted to swallow it whole. The vast shape pressed further through the rift, shadow dripping, whispers echoing like waves of forgotten voices. The false astronomer bowed low, his mirrored eyes reflecting only the creature's endless gaze. The masks writhed, mouths stretched wide, feeding their silence into the air until the room felt void of breath itself. And then, the hum ceased. The light of the rift dimmed. The storm outside returned, but softer now, as if the world exhaled after holding itself too long. The vast form withdrew, receding back into the blackness, leaving only ripples where the glass lens once stood. The masks on the floor stilled, their mouths closing, their eyes dimming until they were nothing more than damp fragments of cloth and paper. The false astronomer rose to his feet. His movements were slow, measured.
Calm.
He walked to the journal upon the desk and closed it gently, as though sealing something within. The lantern steadied, its flame returning to a soft, golden glow. The observatory looked unchanged.
Silent. Still.
Yet nothing was the same. The man who stood there was no longer the one who had first looked through the telescope. He turned once toward the empty lens, a faint smile upon his face. And in the silence, a whisper lingered. Not from the rift, not from the masks, but from him. One must remain. The lantern flickered once, then held steady. The rain carried on, gentle and unbroken, as if the night itself wanted to forget.